From the Cottage Studio, welcome to Religion Ho-Ho's Way, and as always, I'm your host, Ho-Ho. So how y'all's doing? I hope you're doing good. I really do. It's been a while since we've been here together. It really has been. And today we are going to talk about the Last Supper. Oh yeah, that is an awesome story. But it's not just about, the last opportunity that Jesus had to teach, to guide, to be with his disciples before he was arrested. But it's also about the reason they were there in the first place. And that was to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, the Passover. You see, back in them days, it wasn't enough just to set a day aside or a celebration of some sort aside and just call it by a name, like President's Day, like, the 4th of July, like Memorial Day, like Veterans Day. It wasn't enough just to set a day aside. You see, back then, the Jewish community thought that it was just as important, if not more important, to teach the history of why they do what they do. And the Festival of Unleavened Bread, it was no joke. I mean, this was something that they took very, very seriously because what it represented was serious. What it represented impacted the Jews for the rest of their history. It really did. And it was something that they took their time in preparation, and they taught the history. I mean, that was part of the celebration, was teaching the history of why they did what they did. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Let's talk about Passover. Now, if y'all remember, back in a while ago, I was talking about, the 10 plagues of Egypt. And the last plague of Egypt was death. The death of the firstborn. And Moses, through God, gave the Israeli people means by which to be protected from the angel of death. It was to sacrifice their best lamb. It was a festival that was done in a hurry, which is why, it was called the Festival of Unleavened Bread, because it was done in a hurry. They their bread that they had prepared didn't have enough time to rise. Not that they didn't have the yeast in there for it to rise, but it didn't have time to rise. There wasn't any time for that. They sacrificed their best lamb. They ate, and they put the blood of that lamb on the doorpost, the lindet, I think is what they call it, of their doorway. And that was to signify to the angel of death that these are my chosen people. These are the people of the Jewish nation, and they are not to be harmed. That was the whole point of the Passover. The angel of death passing over the houses with that sacrificial blood on the doorway. So that's why they were there. And in this feast of unleavened bread, the Festival of Unleavened Bread, it was, like I was saying, it was to teach the history, to remind themselves and to teach the next generation why they celebrated, why they had this festival in the first place. Because God delivered them from death, their firstborn. Very important. And the Last Supper was in celebration of not only that festival, but it was also an opportunity for Jesus to minister, to guide, his disciples right before he would get arrested, be put on trial, and be crucified. The Lamb of God paying the sin of death for all of mankind. Befitting that Jesus was arrested on the same day as the festival of unleavened bread. And it wasn't done by accident. So the story of the Last Supper begins a few days before, really, because they were on their way to Jerusalem. And, of course, they knew what day was coming. And they knew that whenever they got there, there was going to be a lot of people already in Jerusalem, because it was pretty common practice that people went there to celebrate, the festival of unleavened bread. It was just, that's how it was done. People went to Jerusalem, And Jesus sent, let's see, who was it? It was John and Peter, I believe. He sent them ahead of them into Jerusalem and said, hey, you're looking for a guy carrying a pitcher of water. You're going to follow him to the home that he goes to. You're going to knock on the door. You're going to talk to the owner of the house and say, hey, do you have a room that we could use for the Passover? Now, y'all might think that this is just an everyday occurrence, but au contraire, it isn't. Okay, this isn't like going to the big city and going, hey, we're looking for, somebody driving, a Lincoln Town car. We're not looking for somebody driving a black SUV. It wasn't commonplace to see a guy carrying a pitcher of water. It's just, you didn't see that. That's like as uncommon as seeing a lifted Lamborghini Diablo on some, with some mud tires underneath it on, right outside of a field, owned by a farmer. It's just something you don't see, because that was something that servants and women did. It wasn't something that a guy did. It's just not the way it was back then. So whenever they went to Jerusalem and they seen this, they were like, that's got to be the guy we're looking for. It's the only guy I see around here carrying a pitcher of water. So they did what Jesus instructed them to do. They followed the man to his home, to the house that he went into, and they talked to the owner of the home, and they said, hey, do you have a room? And he did. An upstairs room that was fully furnished for their needs, but, they also provided everything that they needed for the festival of unleavened bread, because they didn't want to burden the homeowner to take care of anything other than just provide the space for them to be in. Yes, it was ready to go, ready for them. But this is also something else that I find pretty awesome about, how the disciples worked, how they, how even Paul taught people back in the day. It was, hey, if you're going to, in your travels, because this is one of the things that Paul did, in your travels, I'm going to be staying at various places. He didn't stay in hotel rooms. He didn't stay in inns. He didn't, he didn't do any of that. Instead, he stayed in the homes of other people whom believed as he did, other members of the faith, and he stayed in their home, but he didn't, he refused to be a burden to anybody. He worked for what he was, consuming. You're living in a house, you're going to need to eat something. He worked for it. It wasn't just a operation of charity. It was, not just I'm going to repay you, but I'm going to work for this. I'm not asking for, something for nothing. And that's how Jesus' disciples were for the festival of unleavened bread. They provided everything. The homeowner provided the space. And whenever you read, and this is actually something that's kind of interesting to me. Okay. And yeah, we know how these type of things goes. Okay. Because the story of the Last Supper can be found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But in all three of these accounts, there's little different caveats that can be found in all of them. A little different, different details, something else comes out of it, a renaming of something, and, other meanings that gets thrown around, different people have different things that they emphasize whenever they're telling a story. That's why it's important that the Gospels are not told in just, from just one point of view. It's told in four. And it's not told in the point of view of just four different people. It was told in points of view of four completely different people. What do I mean by that? If you talk to construction workers, okay, you're going to talk to an electrician about, something dealing with the home, and that's all you talk to is four different electricians. Well, you're going to get four very similar stories, even though you're talking to four different people. But if you're talking about a house and you talk to an electrician, a plumber, somebody that does drywall, and somebody that does carpet, well, you're going to get four completely different stories because you're talking to four different people of completely four different backgrounds. Four different points of view, four different things that they're looking at. So you're going to get four different stories about the same thing because they're looking at it from completely different points of view. That's why it was important, extremely important, that the Gospels be told from different people. Not just different people, but from different points of view. Yeah, all four of them were, disciples, but they had different backgrounds. They came from different places. That's why the stories, I don't want to say the stories change, but details are emphasized in one place where it might not be emphasized in another, because one may see importance in it and another one may not. That's why they do that. That's why they did it like that. That's why historians look at the Gospels and they take it as fact. I mean, yeah, we look at it as being in one book, the Holy Bible, but what we fail to realize sometimes is that the Holy Bible isn't a book. It is a collection of books, of letters, written in different times from different people. It's not like buying a book from your bestseller that is a collection of short stories that he put together into one complete big novel. No, that's not what the Holy Bible is. It's not what it is at all. So you get little different caveats. Now, one of the things that there's several different things about the Last Supper that I find very telling. I mean, of course you have Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And he did that to humble himself. He did that. Let me rephrase that. He didn't really do that to humble himself. He was already humbled. He was already humble. He didn't wash his disciples' feet as a show of humility. He did it to show the disciples to be humble. That's a difference in outlook. That's a difference in meaning. That's a difference in how you see something of what's going on. He wasn't doing that to humble himself. He was already humble. He was doing that to humble his disciples. And his disciples, I mean, even Peter had a hard time with that. He's like, dude, you're you're Jesus. You're the teacher. You're the rabbi. You're the son of God. I'm not worthy for you to wash my feet. I should be washing yours. And he sets the record straight. He goes, dude, I'm here to serve, not to be served. Very telling about the character of Jesus, whom he truly was, how he seen himself. And as it will be made evident and clear later on, whenever we get into Gethsemane, just, who he was and how troubled he was about what was going to happen, and just the whole thing, Another aspect about the Last Supper and one of the teachings is that this is where you find, and I don't remember which book it's in, and I believe it's only in one of them. I don't remember if it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I think it's either Mark or John. I don't think it's in Matthew or Luke, but I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. I'm not looking it up right now. But this is where you have, the part where Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he tells them, look, there was a time in your travels when you were ministering that I told you, don't carry a purse, don't carry a sword, just go and you will be taken care of. Don't worry about it. When you get to where you're going, you can work for what you need along the way, what have you. You don't need to worry about nothing. You don't need to worry about protection. You'll be taken care of. Just don't worry about it. But a time is coming and is yet here that not only will you need to carry your purse, your wallet, money, you're going to need to carry a gun. Because the road is dangerous. It's filled with robbers, thieves, and killers. You're going to need to protect yourself. You will need to do this. It is most important, even if you have to sell your biggest need for survival. Do that so you can afford a gun. Now, obviously, Jesus didn't say gun to his disciples because they didn't have guns back then, but what they had was swords. And Peter, being the gunslinger that he is, I love Peter, I really do. Peter is one of my favorite disciples. Of the original 12, he's my favorite. He's the hothead. He was the hothead. He was the one that was just, he was one of the oldest, if not the oldest apostle. He was kind of set in his ways. He was already whom he was, and he was a bit of a hothead. He was one of them people that, that what was on his mind was coming out of his mouth. What he wanted to do was pretty much what he did. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of thought. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of reflection. He did it. He was who he was. And whenever Jesus said that, whenever Jesus said that you need to carry a sword, you need to have a gun, you need to have protection on you because you need to protect the ones you're with. You need to protect yourself. You need to protect your property. You need to do this. It's important, even if it means you sell something, you need to get it. You need this more, believe me. Peter stands up and he goes, that's all right, man. I got 2 white herb. And Jesus is like, no. You're misinterpreting my point. Because if you do that, have a show of force, you're going to be instigating trouble. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. Don't do that. That's why in a matter of speaking, yes, y'all know me. I am pro Second Amendment. I will be always. But I'm not necessarily pro open carry for that reason. I'm more pro conceal carry. You don't want to be an instigator. You don't want to be somebody that paints a target on your back. But you do want to make whomever may be there wonder, is that person carrying a gun? Does that person have the means by which to protect himself? Because that's a deterrent. If you're open carry, well, you know that person's got a gun. That person's got a knife. That person has the means by which to protect himself. If it's concealed, you just don't know, do you? And y'all know how I operate on this show. I don't mix my shows. I got the political leaning show, I've got a religious leaning show, and I don't blend the two. I really don't do that. But whenever you're talking about this, well, it's important to state the obvious. Even Jesus knew, talking to his disciples, the ones whom would carry the word of what he did, the good news, the gospel, the salvation to the rest of the world, he told them point blank, protect yourself. You need to. You have to. You must. There are people out there on the road that wish you harm. And you need to be able to protect yourself. It's so important that was one of the last messages, teachings, means by which to guide his disciples that Jesus had. Most important. Most important. Now, one of the things about the Passover as well is, during the festival, because this is where the communion was as the church sees it, it was established during the Last Supper. Okay. Now, there's a couple aspects of this I want to talk about. Yes, Jesus took the bread, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body. Eat this in remembrance of me." Yes, he took the wine, and he drank it, and he said, "This is my blood. Drink this in remembrance of me." But this is kind of a twofold thing, okay? One, he took the bread. Why did he take bread? Is the implements what's important here? Because that's the thing. I mean, this was the birth of communion. You go to any church, or most any church, and they have the communion. I'm not saying that the communion isn't important, and I'm not saying any of that. But what I'm saying is, it's not about the act of taking communion. I mean, mind you, this was the Last Supper. Okay. They were celebrating the festival of unleavened bread. They weren't doing this in a synagogue. They weren't doing this in a church. They were doing this as an extended family, because that's also one of the aspects about the Passover. It wasn't just something that was intimate about, it wasn't intimate with your family. It wasn't that. It was, and not even just your extended family, like Christmas may be. This was Friendsgiving. This was family, extended family, and friends. These Passover meals had the potential to be huge. communion isn't just about partaking of a wafer and drinking a small cup of grape juice. It is when you gather as friends, as family, whether it be, and I'm extending this personally and on purpose, not just during the Passover, but when you gather together and when you commune, when you share a meal. Because that's the thing too. I mean, back in the day, meals weren't something that was just, you cook the meal, you present it, you eat it, and then you go about your merry way, go back to the living room and watch the TV. It was more than that. This was like an event that would take hours upon hours. I mean, it wasn't something that you just did as quickly as you possibly could. This is something that they took their time in doing. They enjoyed it. It was important to their day-to-day lives. They were communing with each other, communicating with each other. And Jesus was telling his disciples that when you commune, when you spend time together, when you break bread, when you eat together, do this in remembrance of me. Why did Jesus choose a wafer of bread? It wasn't about the bread. It wasn't about it being unleavened. It wasn't about that. It was bread because that is a staple of every meal that you eat. It wasn't about the bread. It was when you do this, remember the sacrifice. Remember what I did. Remember the legacy. He took a cup of wine, not because it was the wine that was important. It was because the wine was not only important to the festival itself, because they specifically drank 4 cups of wine, specifically. And each of these 4 cups of wine was an illustration of another part of what Jesus did for the Israelites on their exodus out of Egypt after the Passover. Because those 4 cups symbolized taking them out of Egypt, freeing them, because they were no longer slaves when they left. And it wasn't about them just being free. I mean, mind you, the Egyptians, because Moses he hijacked a man. He really did. It was a first, let my people go. Pharaoh said no. And he's like, all right, here you go. This last plague, this is going to devastate your people. They're going to send us away with the riches of Egypt. And before they left, that's what they did. All the gold from Egypt was given to the Israelites. They weren't just leaving. They were free. They could write their own ticket. They can do what they needed to. They could prosper. But God just didn't lead them out of Egypt. He freed them. He didn't just free them, he redeemed them. And he didn't just redeem them. He sent them home. That's what each one of them cups represented. Each one of them cups of wine. That's what they represented in the Passover meal. But he used wine for another reason too. It wasn't just about the festival of unleavened bread. It was about the wine was a staple. Just like the bread was a staple, the wine was a staple in every meal. Do this in remembrance of me. When you gather in my name, when you gather at all, remember me. Remember what I did for the people. Remember what God did for the Egyptians, what God did for the Israelites. Remember what I am doing for you. And by you, I mean us, all of us. Not just not just the Israeli nation, but all of us. Keep looking over there for the time. It's like it's not over there. And that's where communion comes from, because that was the first time the communion shows up in the Bible. But again, it wasn't about the wafer. It wasn't about the wine. It was about the communion. It was about coming together. Not just family, not just extended family, but family, extended family, and friends. Very, very awesome stuff. So we talked about the preparation that was made. We talked about Jesus washing his disciples' feet. We talked about communion. We talked about Jesus' position on self-defense. This was also whenever the betrayer was revealed to the other disciples, to maybe even Jesus himself. I mean, I'm sure that he knew in some way, shape, or form. But this is whenever that was known. And this one actually kind of it interested me. It really did. Because God and Jesus, they do things for a reason. We know that the Festival of Unleavened Bread was a, it was an event. It took some time. So why did Jesus have to call him out like that? And really, it wasn't an aspect that Jesus called him out. Jesus was like, look, this is going to happen. Okay. I'm going to be betrayed. It's got to be this way. That's how it was prophesied in the Bible. So that's how we're going to do it. That's how it's got to happen. That's how it's got to be done. And they all denied it. They all said, no, not me. I'm not going to be the one that does it. I'm not going to be the one that does it. And Jesus was like, look, whoever dips his bread in the whatever is going to be the one that betrays me. And I guess, some time passed afterwards because, they're all going to be watching Jesus and nobody's going to choose that moment in time to dip the bread in the bowl at the same time Jesus did. Ain't nobody going to do that. So I'm sure that some time passed. They don't talk about that in the scripture. I mean, they make it sound like it was, or at least how they talk about it, it's like one happened right after the other. But there had to have been some time elapsed in there. Whoever dips his bread is going to be the one that betrays me. And lo and behold, it's Judas. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. But it had to happen like that. He had to be called out like that. Why? Because, well, yeah, the prep work needed to be done. And a lot of it prior to then had already been done. He had already gotten paid. Or did he already get paid? I don't remember if he already got paid or not. Yeah, I don't remember. But last preparations had to be made. Let's just put it that way. whatever had to be made. There was still some final details, some final issues, some things that had to get ironed out, and Judas needed time to do that because Jesus knew that he was going to be arrested that very day. It's part of the prophecy, So Judas needed that time. And before that, was able to happen. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit the mic. Before that was able to happen, Yeah. Before that ended up happening, Jesus went to Mount Olives. He went to Gethsemane. And he prayed. He prayed with vigor, as if his life depended on it. Coincidentally enough, it did. He took Peter, James, and John maybe with him to Gethsemane. He left the rest of the disciples behind. And Jesus brought with him only his inner circle, his 3 closest friends. And he went away and he, before going off by himself, he told him, he goes, stand watch. I got something I need to do. So he goes like a stone throws away. I mean, not very far away from where he left them did he finally fall down on his knees and start praying to God, start praying to his Father. And he asked God to take the cup from him. Again, symbology there. Symbology, because, a cup. We talked a little while ago that these cups of wine that they drank during the festival, they weren't just cups. They had meaning behind them. Different things that they did, that they said as part of this festival to remind them of what God did for them. And so Jesus went to his Father and he said, please take this cup from me. He didn't want to do it. And he continued to say, by your will, not by mine. I mean, obviously Jesus didn't want to do it. He knew he had to. He knew it had to be done. He knew that it was the only way. Because believe me, if there was another way that it could have went down, God would have found that way. Jesus would have found that way, but there wasn't. There was no other way. It had to happen just like that. An hour passes. An hour. And he goes back to his disciples that they had passed out. And he's like, could you not stay awake for an hour? Could you not watch over me for an hour? The mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. Pray so you don't fall into temptation. And then he leaves them again. And he prays the same thing. Take this cup by your will, not by mine. If there's another way, please, let's use that way. Time passes. The second time, we don't know how much time passes. All we know is some time passes. He goes back to his 3 closest friends and he finds them asleep again. But this time, he doesn't rouse them. This time, he lets them sleep. And then he goes off again and he prays one last time. One last time. Please, God, take this cup from me by your will, not by mine. Pleading. The scriptures even says, I don't remember which one, I think it's Mark, that says that he was sweating and it was flowing off of him as like blood. Not saying that he was sweating blood. It doesn't exactly say that. I mean, like, it might, okay, because I'm reading from the NIV, and it might actually say that if you're reading from one of the other versions. I'm not exactly sure, but it said that the sweat flowed off of him like blood, kind of meaning to me that it wasn't just, beating on his forehead or beating on his arms. Like, he was sweating. It was pouring off of his face. He was in that much distress, anguish over what he knew was about to happen to him. And after praying that one last time, he goes back to his disciples. He goes back to his 3 closest friends. And they're still asleep. This time he wakes them. This time he berates them a little bit. And it was you had one job. You had one job, Carl. And you couldn't do it. And now it's too late because here they come. The agreed upon signal that Judas Iscariot tells the people that showed up to arrest him. He did. He told them that the one whom I kiss is Jesus, is the one that you need to arrest. Arrest that guy. And Judas does. He walks up to him and he betrays him with a kiss. And whenever Judas approaches him, Jesus replied to him, he said, do what you came to do, friend. That I thought was, wow. Oops, sorry. That I thought was wow. Because he doesn't condemn him. He's not mad at him. I mean, in fact, during the Last Supper, during their Passover feast, Jesus said that, whomever betrays him, it would be better for that person as if he had never been born. So he knew what Judas was about to do, but not only that, he knew how Judas would be affected by it. He knew that he would be devastated once it clicked what he had actually done, whom he had truly betrayed. And Jesus didn't condemn him. He still referred to him as friend. I'm like, wow. That just doesn't even compute to me. It's like, in the face of it all, the betrayal is still raw with Jesus, with the rest of the disciples. Jesus forgives him right then and there. No condemnation. Not even, at least in Scripture, that there was nothing besides just acceptance and an olive branch that God extended to Judas. Jesus called him friend. And then he's arrested. He's put in handcuffs. He's put in shackles. And this is where, again, the hothead comes out to play. Because Peter does something stupid. Again, like I said before, Peter's kind of a hothead. He acts without thinking. He speaks before thinking. He does. He is who he is. And Peter takes out his dagger and he lashes out at one of the people that are arresting Jesus. And he cuts off his ear. Not cuts it off. It's laying down on the ground. But Jesus, Jesus had something else in mind. And this is how you know that Peter messed up. Peter did a bad thing. Peter messed up. It was at that time Peter knew he messed up. Because Jesus picked up his ear. The guard's ear. And he puts it back on his head. He picks up the ear and just plop right back on the guy's head. Heals him just like that. Jesus doesn't do anything without a purpose. He doesn't just do. Everything that he does is not only to glorify God, it's that it has a purpose. It's not just to prove that Jesus is whom he says he is. It's with a purpose. Because Peter had a major role to play in the church following the resurrection of Christ. He had a job to do. He was needed. And when Peter cut off the guy's ear, he sealed his fate. He was about to be, and he would have been arrested had Jesus not picked up the ear and put it back as if nothing had happened. Peter would have been arrested. But as it was, they couldn't arrest Peter. You brought in Jesus. Okay, well, we know why you brought him in, but why did you bring this guy in? Well, dude, Peter just got done cutting off Bob's ear. Wait, hold up. You mean that guy? Uh-huh. Cut off that guy's ear. Uh-huh. How many ears did he have before? Well, he only had 2. I'm confused because he's got 2 now. If he cut off his ear, why does he still have 2 ears? Well, you see, what happened was the guy who, the guy who we arrested, well, he put it back on. Wait a second. He cut it off. Yeah. You can't just reattach a limb once it's been cut off. It doesn't work like that. That's what happened. Are you insane? Not exactly. I'm confused. How would that conversation have gone? I mean, really, how would that conversation go? Jesus did what he did to save Peter from imminent death, from dying right beside him on the cross. You know, and maybe that was also something to kind of, maybe it was something that Jesus did so that Peter could finally calm his jets a little bit. Maybe Jesus also did that to, I don't want to say to humble him, but to force Peter to pause. You don't get control of yourself. You're going to do something bad. And next time, I'm not going to be there to fix it. You can't be doing this, Peter. I done told you. You live by the sword. You die by the sword. I done told you, man. You can't be doing this. Peter was to be the head of the Christian faith, the Christian church. He was to lead it past the resurrection and the ascension. How can he do that if he's going to be killed right next to Jesus on a cross? Or however they chose to kill him. But essentially at that point, you know, whenever he cut off his ear, his life was over. There was no turning back after that. I mean, there's very good possibility that that's one of the reasons why Jesus did what he did. You can't just lash out. You have to think. Use your mind. You can't just lash out like that. What if he hadn't had been there? Would Peter have had the frame of mind right after the deed was done to go, oh, my bad? Would he have? Probably not. Would any of the other disciples had? Probably not. The Last Supper, awesome story. Because one of the things that it does is it highlights just how the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, how God freed the Israelites from slavery out of Egypt. How he led them out of Egypt. How he freed them from slavery, redeemed them, and then led them to the promised land. It's not just a story about the sacrificial lamb that had to die so the Israelites could be saved from the angel of death during Passover. It was to bring the Old Testament and the New Testament together. That's what Jesus did. He brought the old and the new together. He linked them in a way that only he could do. Wow. In a festival that is designed by its very nature to teach us why we come together in the first place. To remember the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. To remember how God saved the Israelites from slavery in Egypt to unite a people, family, friends, so we can carry on a tradition. Yeah. The Last Supper, an awesome story. You know, a lot of meaning in there. Things that you're just not going to find anywhere else in the Bible. I mean, where else in the Bible are you going to find that Jesus was pro Second Amendment and concealed carry? Where else are you going to find that one at? I don't know. I hadn't seen it anywhere else in the Bible, but I've seen it there. And the last opportunity that Jesus had to teach and guide his disciples, he told them, protect yourself at all costs because the road is filled with danger. Winter is coming. You going to be Jon Snow and know nothing? Are you going to be Tyrion Lannister, drink and know things? Or are you going to be the three-eyed raven that knows and sees everything? I like that analogy. Throwing those in there. Yeah. I'm a Game of Thrones fan. Good show. Not for children. Maybe you shouldn't watch that. Holy cow. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't watch that. Don't watch that. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. That's it. You know, that's the show. Next time I might actually, you know, I got a few things that I'm wanting to get into. You know, I'm actually wanting to get into the crucifixion. I mean, there was so much stuff to happen on that one. I don't remember if the crucifixion is one of them that I've already talked about. Let me actually scroll through this right quick, because I know that one's, you know, just a wow type of a thing. You know, and it doesn't look like the crucifixion is in there, because there's a lot that happened on that one. No, it doesn't look like I've done that one. Very good, very good. I might do that. I don't know. I'm probably going to wait on that one for, you know, like Easter time. Talk about all that. Yeah. That's what I'm going to do. Easter time. That's when I'll be waiting to do that one. Next time, who knows? Who knows what we're going to be talking about next week. But anyway, I thank y'all for tuning in and thank y'all for listening, being part of the show. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate it very much, actually. So y'all have yourself a great one, and I'll see you next time.